So root cellaring here in northeastern Minnesota. I do know that we had people registered from all over the region, so some of the things may or may not be quite as relevant to them, but the idea here is to really give people in northern climates an introduction to some of the root cellaring techniques that we have found really successful in this region, and to share our experiences. Our goal is to really support you and other local communities in using root cellars to build a more sustainable food system for yourselves and your community. So here we go. I'm going to just I'm going to do about a 15-minute introduction of the panelists and the different root cellars that we're specifically talking about, and then we're going to really try to get to most of your questions. And we are recording this presentation as well as the slideshow. They'll all be posted at the Finland Food Chain website after we're done. So there are many kinds of root cellars. There are many types of root cellars as there are creative minds who are trying to figure out ways to preserve food. So most people are familiar with the kind of concrete built into hillsides, old and new. Building into hillsides is common. Sherry Rovig is going to talk about some earth bag root cellars that her and some friends have made, which are really interesting, especially for those who need to build something above grade. In lots of sections of northern Minnesota, we have heavy clay soils or bedrock, and so digging into a hill, I don't have a hill to dig into. So sometimes we need to think about building above grade. And then I'm going to talk just really briefly about our root cellar, which basically was repurposing an extra space that we had when we built another building. We said, hey, why not use all this space instead of just some of it? And then we can talk a little bit about modernized, mechanized, large-scale production if people want to, but really we want this to be about answering questions for people who are here. And then, you can always go to the buried refrigerators and more. So tell us what you have in your chat and in the chat box, and we'll try to get to them. So Rebecca Gawboy and her husband farm just outside of Tower. Did I get that right, Rebecca?
Yes.
Yeah, some people say Embarrass, some people say Tower.
No, we're Duluth Township.
Okay, so that's even more obscure. Wonderful.
That's right. We're right outside of Tower.
And Rebecca has the honor of owning and having renovated and repurposed a very large old root cellar from, was it the 1940s?
It's probably the 30s. It was probably
the
done
30s.
During the Depression era.
Okay, which held nothing but potatoes.
Yeah, this was the potato growing country here, all through Embarrass and Kugler. And in fact, 80% of the potatoes grown in the country came from up here. Those were the days before subsidized irrigation out west.
Yep. And much of Minnesota is potato and cabbage growing country, so there are lots of antique or old root cellars in the landscape, many of which are fully serviceable and no reason not to keep using them. So Rebecca brings a lot of expertise on how to do that. David of Round River, he's going to probably just chirp in a little bit. This is a picture of his empty root cellar because I guess they just took everything out. And then Sherry Rovig's going to talk about Earth Bag Root Cellar construction. She's had her hand in building 2, and so has a lot of great experience to share with everybody. And then ours, we basically needed to build a storage shed and said, why not extend that roof and turn it into the back side of that shed into a root cellar. So short version is that's what we did, and it's working really, really well. So I'm going to just quickly go right through some of these construction methods. So this earth bag construction, if nobody's ever seen it before, you literally put sand, soil in a bag, and then you put them together like bricks. This is the first one that Sherry Rovig had her hand in. It is 8 feet in diameter on the interior and tall enough that you can walk into it without bending or crawling. because even though we want to store food, we do all get old, and crawling isn't always a fun thing when we get a little older. So this is it going up, and this is that root cellar with its largely finished shape before it was buried in soil and a little bit of snow on the first season. And this is Molly, who actually is the owner of this wonderful root cellar, inviting you in this lovely hobbit door. And some people might think, I mean, you look at that, you know, she can stand in the center and stick her hand out and spin around and almost touch the walls. So on some level, you might think that that's too small a space, but she's actually very glad they didn't build a larger one, because for her and her partner and a few family friends, this root cellar is fully adequate. They can store an immense amount of food, and the beams up on the top there, she actually hangs things from that as well. So she can really layer what she's storing in that root cellar, which is really cool. This is what it looks like now that it's been well established. Sherry, when do you remember when Molly built her root cellar?
I think it was 9 years ago.
9 years ago. So it has fully embraced the landscape, and it is lush. She's got currants and vines and raspberries, and it's amazing how diverse the landscape is on the root cellar itself. And the thing she was so proud of was right at the top where it's really dry is a perfect spot for her strawberries. They do really well right up at the top of the root cellar, that she can access from behind. So it's a really pretty cool operation. And then Sherry, because she's always trying to do something better, figured out how to improve upon a system. One of the things that was really smart and simple, but apparently nobody else had thought of, is to sew gussets in those bags, because then when you turn it back inside out, it actually becomes more brick-like. You don't have those weird little corners sticking out. Did you make that little stand, Sherry?
Actually, Molly made the stand.
Molly made the stand, yeah. So a little stand to put the bags in when you're filling them up obviously makes them a lot easier. And then that metal panel slidey thing underneath. Once this bag is full of soil, how much does it weigh, Sherry?
I'll get back to you on that. Maybe about 60 pounds.
Yeah, it's heavy. You're not going to be like picking it up and moving it. Plus, there's a little bit of barbed wire between the courses to hold those bags in place. So that metal slidey thingy you use to actually get the bag into position before it's, boom, tamped down. And so simple tools, but things that are really important to make the whole system go up and be more successful. So they've got a couple of courses down. Barb is up there tamping down. And there's a whole book on this. We're not going to go into all the gory details, but we wanted to give you a chance to just see how this thing goes up. And then there's some exterior insulation. Sherry chose to put wood roof on hers rather than the coiled bag roof that Molly did, because she had a larger diameter. Is that right, Sherry?
There's a number of reasons, but yeah, that'll do.
Well, tell me, what are the reasons?
I wanted to have straight walls. There's a different technique when we did Molly's. We did it more like a beehive shape with a catenary curve. Mm-hmm. And that brings the walls in as you go up so that it closes over the top. And we wanted to be able to just have that more vertical room for standing for the whole perimeter.
Right, that makes sense. And Molly had said that she had to kind of tweak the door so it would be straight, because otherwise, because that wall would lean, you'd have to have the door kind of open out, and she wanted the door to open in. So yeah. So there are lots of little details around the edges that you can work with if you so choose to. And then Sherry, because she's a perfectionist, she would never say this, but I will, because I know her well enough. She's got moisture protected switches and lights, and look at that while the door had been open, that's why it was 50 degrees, but really nice humidity. And Sherry, why don't you just give us a 30-second overview of how you feel your greenhouse has performed? You've had it up for a year and a half now?
No, we just finished it last fall,
Oh,
just before the weather turned.
but you did have one winter in it.
One winter season. We learned stuff. It performed well, very well. The temperature, it never froze, but it was down in the, like, from 34 to 38 degrees. Humidity levels were good, except at one point, I didn't realize that, excuse me, that the vent pipe, where it extended out through the straw and snow, collected frost and blocked the vent. So at a brief period, the humidity level went way up. And so that was the only issue really that we had with it.
Okay. All right. And Sherry was really nice enough to kind of put together some stats for us on the dimensions, volume, and then the cost and labor that went into building this. And this was a big project. It was not trivial, and yet still achievable for a really nice root cellar. And then of course, she's going to have all this terracing area on the exterior for more plant growing. So that's the nice thing about above grade root cellars, is you can really multi-purpose them. So then just to kind of really quickly go through, so we had this pump house that was, by an accident of history at our farm, is sitting out in the middle of nowhere, attached to nothing. And it was a real pain in the butt to keep it unfrozen. So, and we also needed more storage. So we decided to build a new shed. And we figured, why not, while we're doing that, create a root cellar. So we ended up buying this timber frame from some friends of ours. And you can see on the picture that says view from the west, you can see the silhouette of the pump house there that was captured. So what we did is we poured a 20 by 20 foot slab around the pump house, and then we put the timber frame on that. And instead of finishing the roof where it would naturally end near the front of the pump house, we extended that roof all the way down to about 3 feet. And then from the west side, you can see how that roof goes all the way down, and you'll use block. And then if you turn the corner, there it is. There's the door into our little root cellar. And it provides, so our biggest issue is that we harvest thousands of pounds of apples in the fall, because we do vinegars and lots of other apple products. My husband is a wood turner, and he needs a place to cure some of his wood. And then I also graft hundreds of trees and need places to overwinter them. So we've had this up and running for about 5 years now, and it works like a dream. We actually don't store much food in it, though we could, but we use it for lots of other purposes that we need things for overwintering and moderating temperature and moisture. And then again, of course, I'm a big fan of the exterior landscapes around these structures. So we've planted it in clovers, and we have lots of raised beds where we're growing lots of crops. So I don't know if Terry has joined us, but Terry is a local person up in Finland who has this very root cellar. And she said, what do I do with it? So I'm going to ask my panelists, especially Rebecca, who has experience, David, or anybody else. When you look at this, what do you want Tracy to ask herself? How to assess this?
Well, we have a lot of old root cellars around. This is David.
Yep.
I would want to go open the door and see how well it's built. And
there it is.
Oh my gosh, it's even better.
It's nice, isn't it?
That's amazing. That I would definitely fix up.
Yeah. So she's got a little leak in the very back center there that she kind of sent a close up. I don't know if that's a seep or what, but yeah. So Tracy, I hope you've logged in. I can't see the list, but it's a lovely root cellar.
One of the reasons for the seepage, maybe there's a vent that's leaking.
Oh, yeah.
Or a loading, there could be a pipe for loading with potato, but it's not deep enough. You know, what happens over the years, what happened with ours too, is the soil erodes and then it doesn't keep it at a constant temperature.
Okay.
So we've had to.
Think we're losing you a little, Rebecca. Well, we're going to just kind of keep motoring along. So 2 things, even though it looks like it's in really good shape, 2 things are to just assess that seepage, whether it's a vent that got plugged or maybe a chute that needs to be closed off so that it doesn't allow seepage. And then just maybe monitoring the temperatures over this next winter to see if in fact it holds temp. It might need an extra load of soil on the top because, as Rebecca said, hers, which is an older one like this, they do get some erosion off of the top, and sometimes they need to have soil or gravel added to provide that insulation. So that's
Cindy?
awesome.
Cindy, this is Sherry. Can I add one thing?
Yes, Sherry, please do.
I'm not sure on the picture, but I would also look to see if there's any tree roots that have been growing in towards that roof.
Yes.
So that could very well be what's contributing to that leaking at the back. I would probably go ahead and, at least in the area around where the leak is, go ahead and dig down and see what they had covering as far as a vapor barrier.
Right.
And build up from there, not just adding more earth on, but actually seeing for sure what's the issue
down there. Right.
Yeah, and making sure that you have, you know, tree roots and things like that not impinging on it.
Right. And if you look at that front picture, those 2 trees to the right of the entrance probably should come down because those roots are just kind of looking for a place to get into the root cellar, which we don't necessarily want. So one of the other questions, so I asked people to send us in email questions ahead of time, and I got a lot of questions from people who have older root cellars and said, what can I put in them? And so the short and smart alecky answer is anything you want, but perhaps people who are here who have done a lot of root cellaring could share a little bit of what kind of mix of things they use their root cellars for.
Cindy, this is Sherry.
Yeah, Sherry.
Well, I'm looking at the pictures there that you have up, and with all the canning jars and things.
Yeah.
And depending on the moisture,
yeah,
the humidity, you can end up with a lot of rust on your lids.
Right.
That's
yes,
one.
And I intentionally put that picture up to see if anybody would notice some issues there. That looks like more of a warm season pantry to me than it does a root cellar. You know, with the wicker wine basket thingies. So cold crops, you know, beets, kohlrabi, carrots, all of those root crops, onions, potatoes, summer squash, apples.
It's not actually the best combination with the onions. Onions like it a little drier.
Okay.
I actually store those in a different structure.
Okay.
And also the same thing for a lot of winter squash, likes it a little drier. So you can kind of figure out, like we have with our vents, where we could adjust to have it be not as humid, but they're really, some people have different rooms if their root cellar is big enough, and adjust humidity in various rooms. That's getting up there as far as a fancier root cellar, but
Yeah,
those are considerations. What are the different humidity levels and temperatures that they like?
right. And some people do have the luxury of having a large enough space, or a space that can have different spaces that are independently vented. Um, although I've heard conflicting things about, whether or not it's okay to store apples with other things, because apples release ethylene. Potatoes like it a little. Potatoes like it warmer or drier. I can't remember.
Potatoes do great when it's cold.
Do potatoes do great when it's cold? Okay.
They like it cold, and the humidity level relatively high too. The apple thing, Cindy, with the ethylene gas, we were concerned about that and had actually put blocks in on the walls where we could, of our earth bag cellar, where we could potentially actually add partitions to separate the apples and keep that ethylene gas away. And then we read about the fact that the ethylene gas rises, and if we actually just put the apples up higher, closer to the vent, then the gas goes out the vent and doesn't bother the rest of the vegetables that we have in there, and that worked great.
Okay. Cool.
We have a question in the chat about, is this also a place to store plants to winter over?
Yes, I use my root cellar all the time to overwinter plants. Hardwood cuttings, potted trees, bare root grafted trees. So yes, root cellars are a really effective way if you're doing any kind of that hardwood or plant propagation. It's a great place to overwinter them. For the same reason, it's a great place to overwinter potatoes. The plant is in its dormant state, and as long as it stays cool enough, it won't break dormancy, and it'll just kind of hang out there until spring. So yes, definitely. I also saw, I realize I rocketed through here. There's a question about building a below ground root cellar where there's a shallow water table. And I think the short answer to that question is, just like in places like I have all clay soil, if I dig a hole, it fills up with water. If you dig down and it's going to fill up with water, then you're going to want to put in a root cellar that's above grade. And that's where something like the one off the back of the shed that we did works well, or the earth bag ones work really well, because those are things that are relatively easy to build above grade and are really effective and not nearly as costly as building with, bricks and things like that. So Marita just asked, what kind of storage containers work best for vegetables being stored, and what is the highest temperature for storing vegetables? Sherry, David, you want to take that?
Yeah, I'll jump on that a little bit. The biggest challenge for the storage of vegetables is in the fall, getting your space cold enough, fast enough. And that's one thing that has become harder to do. So in our root cellar, we have basically a vent that goes out to the outside. So whenever it's cooler outside than in the root cellar, we vent the root cellar with that air. So, it all depends. We don't, just like Sherry talks about, she's exactly right. Winter squash, pumpkins, onions, all are at a little warmer temperature and much drier. So we're looking at potatoes, carrots, and if it could be 34 to 36 the whole time, that would be great. So just try to avoid freezing. Yep. Anything right above, for many of the classic beets, cabbage, just right above freezing is the perfect amount, especially if you can have high moisture for your classic root cellar crops.
Okay, so that kind of dovetails into another question that came in. How do you manage the moisture, heating, and cooling in your root cellar? So ours, we have a low vent and a high vent that we choose to either open or close, as David said, depending on whether we want to suck in cold air or we want to release some, you know, if we've got a big pile of apples in there, we'll open the upper vent so it's venting a little bit. We have a concrete floor. I know Sherry and Sherry has a dirt floor, and we hypothesized amongst ourselves that that was adding to the humidity, because my humidity doesn't get nearly as high as hers. David, do you have something to?
Our floor is bedrock.
Bedrock.
So it can be moist. Water sometimes goes along, so that also adds to the moisture. So we're built right on bedrock, which, you know, since bedrock's actually a little warmer temperature than we like, it's a little more challenging. So.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's better, Rekka.
I moved to my phone. I
Oh,
hope
okay.
this works.
Okay.
Ours is a cement floor, but we're on a gravel hill. So we have super good drainage. We never have rain coming in or any kind of moisture on the ground. And the humidity stays right where it's at.
And what's your average humidity, Rebecca?
It's between 85 and 95.
Okay, so pretty
which
high.
Is where I want. It's
Yep.
very high. And I mean, in the deepest part of winter, sometimes it drops a little bit, but not very much. So one of the things I know that people talk about putting winter squash in their root cellar, your winter squash will rot in a root cellar that has high humidity.
Yep.
So, you know, and it needs to be in a warmer temperature than that. And the apple discussion, we always have kept apples in there. We just don't keep them next to the potatoes. There's never been an issue.
Okay.
So, I mean, granted, we have a big root cellar, but what we do have is we keep all of our fermented food in there. So it's not processed. You know, we don't can it. We ferment it, and then we put it into jars and we keep it in our root cellar. And we do have rusty rings that, you know, we go through rings pretty fast, but the food keeps beautifully. And and I have ferments down there that have been there, you know, that are aging hot sauce ferments that are 3 and 4 years old.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, because our root cellar
delicious.
and the way we cool it off, you know, David was talking about how he cools it off. When we say the temperature is going to drop at night, we just open the doors wide open and put a fan in the doorway and blow that cold air in all night. And the first thing in the morning, we close it all up. So it cools off fairly quickly.
So the key is cooling it off early enough in the season when you're putting things into the cellar, and then keeping it cool throughout the season. Actually,
we keep it cool. We're cooling it off even before we put anything in there.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we don't harvest until we have, but you know, if the temperature is going to go drop down into the 30s, low 30s, we open it up, and that happens a lot in September, even though we haven't harvested anything by then.
Okay. So isn't that interesting that we're going to blow cold air into our root cellars? I love that. I love that. That's wonderful. And then Molly, who's the other person who has that root, the earth bag, her and I talked a lot because hers is small enough, and ours tends to, because it's not as well insulated as some other root cellars, it tends to it'll drop just a titch below freezing, just you know, 1 or 2 degrees below freezing. And we've both found this bucket of water trick to be really great in small spaces that are trying to drop just a little bit below freezing. If you put a bucket of water into the root cellar, when water starts to freeze, it actually has to take in energy from the atmosphere, because the molecules are getting aligned, and that takes energy to make it into ice. So it's called the phase change, using the phase change energy. So as the water is wanting to go from liquid to solid, it's sucking heat out of the air, and then will actually keep your your, or no, it's the other way around. It'll keep your root cellar from dropping below freezing because
Yeah,
the energy is
it's
going
actually emitting a
into,
little,
pardon?
yeah, putting a little heat into the space.
Into the room
in that
during the
phase.
phase change. Yeah. Yeah. So, and
what we have done, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna say, well, I trust our root cellar most years, but if it's a very lean snow year, we keep a milk house heater in there plugged in, set to freeze. So it kicks on if the temperature drops to 32. And I'm
Okay.
sure that's saved us several times in 40 below weather with thin snow cover.
Yeah, that's the thing if we have really thin snow cover. Yeah.
Yep.
So another question that came in is, how do you store these different things? Are you storing them loose? Do you do it in dry sand, peat? I'd love to hear people's, how do you guys handle all that?
Okay, this is Becky. Okay, this is Becky. We store our potatoes in bins. I have a pallet down over a piece of blue foam insulation, so there's no, cold air coming in. I roll the potatoes in and they sit there all winter. With the beets and the carrots, I have to cover them. I've never had luck with sand, but I have had luck with putting them into boxes or covering them with peat.
Okay, so what's your problem been with sand, Rebecca?
It seemed to draw the moisture out of the vegetables.
Okay.
And the finished product, the way I've done it, I tried that a couple years and it was not a big success. So this way has always worked for us. Before we had a root cellar, we had at another farm we lived on, we had a carrot refrigerator, which was just filled with carrots in plastic bags full of had holes poked in them.
Okay.
And I've done that with late carrots. The other ones are already stored, so I throw some in bags, cut holes in them, and throw them in a bin, and they keep really well that way too.
Okay. Well, that picture, Sherry, I'm going to ask you to talk about how you get the sand to work for you, because that picture of the beet in that person's hand, that was taken last week in Sherry's root cellar.
Beautiful.
And is that gorgeous? So Sherry, tell us your magic.
It's damp sand.
It's damp sand, so not dry, not
dry.
wet.
The drawback, I've done two different ways. I've done with the damp sand, and I've also used fresh sawdust that has a lot of moisture still in it. So we get it from
that's a good idea.
Local sawmill. And the sawdust is a little nicer as far as being easier to clean off vegetables.
Yes.
But you can see in the picture where I'm holding the beet, there's also a cooler that's back behind that. That was also full of sand with carrots in it.
Okay.
And the cooler helped keeping the, just with the lid there, it helped keep some of the moisture in the sand as well.
Okay.
But that's really, you're just looking to try to not have an environment where your vegetables dry out and they stay at a good temperature and a good humidity. And however you need to do that, you make it happen.
Yeah, I think you're right, Sherry. You're doing a great job with the sand, but we started with sand and peat and wet sawdust, and it's, makes everything a lot heavier. At least with the sand and such. After a few years of trying that, we just went to straight bins with the vegetable in it. And of course, we have a very moist root cellar on bedrock. And it worked fine for us. So the other thing I would add to this, so we just, because the amount of food and stuff, it's just so much easier. The other thing we do, which you're not supposed to do, is wash your vegetables. We wash all our vegetables before we root cellar them. And we have found we use them much quicker and much better because they're ready to go. And we don't get the staining on the carrots that our soil will get. And so we break the rules, we wash our vegetables. And I think part of the long-term solution is growing things that store well. One of our potatoes we just pulled out of our root cellars, just brand new good, a French fingerling. And so we're also selecting
Yes.
for varieties that store well in your root cellar. So,
Yeah.
so that's another neat way. So we went from really hard systems to really simple systems, and it still worked. But again, moisture, cold.
David, I just want to say that I find that really encouraging. And because this was our first winter, we just went with, what we had familiarity with. But I'm planning this coming winter to try experimenting with a few different techniques and see what works well.
Yeah, that'll be fun to do, and then you'll find your optimum for your space.
Yeah.
Right. And I think for people who are listening in, it's like, tell me the magic recipe, how to do it. And there are some rules of thumb, obviously, but I think the real take home message is, there's some good resources out there, whether you're doing them, packing them in plastic or in totes or in sand or sawdust, is just, don't be afraid to do a couple of different things, and maybe some won't work and some will work, but eventually you're going to find that sweet spot for your particular space in your particular climate. And definitely the selecting varieties that store well. And because my specialty is apples, that's a question I get a lot. There are some apples that store really, really, really well, and there are some apples that don't store at all, and everything in between. And so when it comes to fruits, you really have to, if you're going to try to store a fruit, it's got to be a variety that is storable and will store. And the same thing with potatoes and other, fruits and vegetables. You just select a variety that will store, that is bred for storing, and that makes a huge difference. Yeah.
I do want to comment on the carrot storage. What we've discovered, we also scrub our vegetables, we wash our vegetables off for the same reasons David does, but I also cut the root end off of the carrot. And
Really?
that way I don't have any sprouts, and I don't get hairy carrots. The stem end. Not the root, well, the roots too, the stem end. And I don't get hairy carrots, and I don't get any sprouting, which really preserves the carrot, because as soon as it starts to sprout, it's drawing nutrients, flavor, and moisture out of the carrot itself.
Right.
One thing, this is Sherry, one of the things that I've seen coming up with questions is it good to use like a wooden crate or whatever, drawers, things like that? I think any of those things are fine. I would not use cardboard boxes or things that can hold too much moisture and develop mold.
You're right.
That would be one thing to consider.
Yep.
And there is a question, Cindy, for you about which varieties of apples store well. Give us your top 3 storage apples.
People who are up here in northern Minnesota, you're going to get mad when I say this, but this is my desert island apple variety. If I were forced to live on an island and I could only pick one apple for the rest of my life, what would it be? And I'm going to say Haralson. It's an old variety, and people like new stuff and yada yada, but Haralson is a absolutely fabulous apple. It's super hardy. It's good fresh off the tree. It's great in cider. It stores well. It dehydrates well. It's a champion apple. Yes. Rebecca says yes too. So don't just discard Haralson because it's an old variety. Sometimes oldies are goodies. Another one that I really love is Frostbite. It is a longer season apple, so people way up in Finland have a hard time sometimes getting it ripe, but it will store sub-ripe. And one of the newer varieties that will actually store for short, 3 to 4 months is Honeycrisp. Yep. So for those who just can't help themselves and they have to have a newer variety, Honeycrisp does store well for 3 to 4 months. And there's some great resources out there if you start Googling apple varieties, there are something in excess of 5,000 known apple varieties and at least 3,000 store well. So just take, you know, when you're buying an apple and you know that you're going to want to store it, make sure it's a storable variety. And if you can't get that information from the person who's selling it to you, don't buy it from them. Go buy it from another grower or find that information before you buy that variety. I'm trying to just click along here. We're doing pretty good on time. So there are innumerable resources on root cellaring, but these are two that I think are really, really useful, especially for our region. This Cold Cellars for Year-Round Local Food Farming from John Birnbaum, Michigan State U. It's online. It's basically a PowerPoint that he turned into a little document. And so it's got snippets of information. What I liked about it was it kind of did a really nice overview of, you know, the types of root cellars, what parts of the country you can use these in. He's from Michigan, so he has kind of a Michigan take. And then looked at different ways of putting together shelving, you know, all the different kinds of things that you can put in a root cellar as long as you kind of plan ahead. I mean, it's everything you can grow, even cucumbers you can root cellar for short periods of time. You know, tomatoes don't last long, but you can extend their life. And so I really like this because it was just a nice, quick drive-by of different things. So people who are just trying to wrap their head around what they can and can't do with their root cellar. There's more than you can, in general, there's more than just potatoes and carrots. You can grow you can store lots of different things in your root cellar. And then this book, if you don't already have it, Root Cellaring, Natural Cold Storage of Fruits and Vegetables. I just Googled it. You can get used copies for like $7. It's a great book. It really is a great book, especially the 91 revised. It really answers a lot of the questions that people have been asking and gives you lots of examples of different things. So just a great resource if you're gonna, you know, if you want to use a root cellar. If you can't spend $15, then, you know, do something else. And then I know there's a lot of interest on the food farm, which is their big fancy one. And I just decided that we weren't going to try to cover a really high-tech root cellar on this particular call, but I put all of this information together. Their first root cellar in 2000, which was basically the basement of the house, which was so successful, they needed more space. And in 2015, they broke ground for a new root cellar. It was a huge project, $300,000. The blueprints are online, and there's lots of YouTube videos and virtual tours of their operation. This will all be on the slideshow that will be posted on the Finland Food Chain website. So if people want to go and check out the food farm, I've done some of the homework for you, so you don't have to go Googling and seeing, you know, these are some of the better pieces if you want the full story of the food farm root cellar, which is an awesome structure. And so this is my last slide, but we can still keep talking. We've got time.
Did
Yes.
I wanted to, I just wanted to bring up the traditional way the Ojibwe stored food underground.
Yes.
They built underground food storage places in a variety of places, but clearly near their village and oftentimes near food sources. And what they did was they dug sort of a bottle-shaped hole in the ground about 3 feet deep, and they filled that pit full of food up until where the neck got tighter at the top. And then they put a layer of ashes over the top, wood ashes, and then dirt on top of that and leaves over the top. And they could keep food all winter long there. And the ashes are to keep vermin out, to keep mice
Ah,
and things coming into their food storage. And they weren't huge, but they made many of them so
Yeah.
that they had caches of food in convenient places.
yeah. And there's actually if you just Google pit root cellar, there's a bunch
Yep.
of really great examples of that online, whether it's burying a plastic tote or a garbage can, or like you said, just a 5-gallon flower pot
Hello.
protected. And I like the idea of using the ash.
Hello.
Yeah.
What they did was they covered the food with a layer of birch bark before they put the ashes on, so the ashes didn't sift on. But it kept the vermin out and it kept the food safe all winter. And usually they would open up one of these caches of food and take all of that food out to use. And then, they would have other caches also.
We had another question come in. Can wooden drawers be used for storing vegetables? And my first
Yes.
inclination is, yeah, that's
Yeah,
perfect.
we use lots of them.
Yeah, wood seems like a really ideal medium because it'll hold some moisture. It doesn't draw it out of the food. It won't taint the food. It doesn't get moldy. I know, Sherry, when you use sawdust, I know you get it, do you get it from Lester River? And that's a lot of like softwoods, conifers, tamarack, things like that.
Yeah, we got it from Lester River, and it was a variety. Mostly we used pine.
Okay. And does anybody have a preference one way or another if you're going to use wood, sawdust, hardwood, softwoods, or it all kind of does a good job?
I think the freshness is what's important.
Okay, so having it be fresh, not something that's been
Yep.
composting and full of
Yep.
funguses and stuff. Yeah, so fresh. Yeah, minor details, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. If anybody else has any last-minute questions, they could unmute or they could type it into the question and answer section.
Cindy, this is Sherry again.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, we also tried an experiment last winter with putting our mushroom logs in the, and I think that would have worked great until we had that issue where the vent pipe frosted up and our humidity got too high and we started to get some mold on the logs, and I very quickly took them out of there because I didn't want it competing with the other spawn that we had inoculated the logs with. But I'm hoping by fixing that vent problem, which just involves actually insulating it on the outside, excuse me, that we can use the root cellar next winter for the mushroom logs.
Cool. Cool. So in his last few minutes, any other cool non-traditional uses of root cellars that you guys have done yourselves or heard of?
I keep all my extra dishes in the root cellar. We have collected a whole variety of dishes from different households. And whenever my kids move out or move into a different place, they say, you got any dishes, Ma? And I send them down to the root cellar.
That's awesome.
It's big. We have a lot of space in there, so.
That's great.
There's a question about, does it matter if they use plastic baskets to store food in the root cellar?
So do plastic baskets, I think, are just fine, right?
Yeah.
We use combination of.
I've used tubs.
Yeah, we have plastic crates, wood crates. That's all good. Just wash them, everything down. We sanitize everything at the end of the season, washing things down, getting it all cleaned so that when we start it up again, that can be really helpful.
Yep.
Yep. So just making sure you're putting clean stuff in is, that's the biggest thing. Yeah. Yep. I think that's good. Well, as I mentioned really at the very beginning, my husband is a wood turner, and one of our non-traditional uses of the root cellar is he cuts down a tree and then he has to section it up into logs, and that log, 18-inch section of log, that has to cure for about 2 years before he'll do his initial turning. And that has to happen over a very slow time. So very moderate temperatures, very consistent, high humidity. He likes it at about 75%. So it's drying, but not drying very fast. So that's our non-traditional use of our root cellar. My husband stores his wood turning projects in there, which is pretty fun.
Cool.
The only other non-traditional use that I've seen is that in the heat of summer, it's a really nice place for the dogs.
Oh, sure. They would love that.
We use ours as a summer extra refrigerator space because it's still under 40 degrees in our root cellar.
There you go.
It's, I've still got it for extra refrigerator space down there.
Yep. Cool. Thank you, everyone, again. I hope this has been helpful, and that, visit our website. You will be able to re-listen to this if you missed a little tidbit of joy, and then the slideshow will be there as well. And thank you so much to Rebecca and Sherry and David for being our panel members and contributing your wisdom and experience. We appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right.